Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
And I'm Stephen Park. And I just finished listening to an episode of a podcast that I really like. They did a special one-off episode where they went to Disneyland.
Yes.
And they just did random rides. They then rated both the rides and the foods.
Yes.
And it got me thinking about the time that we went to Disneyland.
Yeah, recently, just last November.
Yeah. And the funny thing was, you weren't that excited when I first brought up the idea, right?
I mean, I was a little excited, but the reason for the dampened excitement was because the last time that I went there, I was 15 years old, and I was there with not only my family, but my mom's sister's family. So it was a lot of children, not only from my family, but the time that we went was in July, which is peak season when there are children everywhere, and
Southern California heat, where the sun just beats down on you the whole day.
Yes, and we waited in line for one ride, and we were only able to ride two different things that whole day, and it was hot, and I felt bored and overstimulated. Now that I know that I'm partially autistic, now I understand why I was overstimulated, but still, the point was I didn't have very good memories of Disneyland.
Yeah, and I was kind of the same growing up. So I grew up about 15, depending on traffic, is somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes away from it. So it was somewhat available. The cost is not what the cost is now. So you could actually go to Disneyland without having your whole life savings being spent. But as I started growing up, one of my closest friends, he ended up taking me there because he had free tickets from his work. It was a prize that he won.
Yeah.
And we rode the single rider lines because we don't need to go hand in hand on every ride.
Yeah.
So we rode so many rides, and we had such a fun time. And that was actually the day that half the park actually had a blackout. And one of the major Rose Bowl games were happening in California. So it was jam-packed with half of the park only open.
Oh my gosh.
And still, that memory of it was way better than I ever remembered Disneyland being as a kid. And I think it's that difference of going as a family or as a kid and having things that you need to take care of.
Right.
Versus I'm here to have fun for myself.
Exactly.
Which was the experience I really wanted to give to you.
And I got it, and it was so much fun. I felt like a child again. That's how much joy I felt being at Disneyland this time around.
Yeah, because we got to just hang out. We got to eat. We had, we don't have a ton of money, but we had enough money. We saved for this trip to kind of go there, eat the different foods, try the different things. We planned for a while for this trip. We did.
We watched a lot of YouTube videos, and we also researched things. I researched things on Pinterest and figured out what were the best routes to take. Where do we have to go first? Which ones have the shortest lines at what time of day?
How to do line drop.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. It was madness, but it was so much fun.
You mean rope drop?
Rope drop.
Yes.
Is that what it's called? Rope drop?
At the beginning of the day?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Rope drop.
So the important things, though, are... Because I think a lot of people are very jaded of what Disneyland is. There is a lot of money that goes into going into Disneyland as an experience.
Right.
There are a lot of kids on a lot of these days.
Yes.
But I think it's all about planning. I mean, we don't have kids, so it's not a concern of ours.
Right.
So we went in November. And if you go the week after Thanksgiving until about mid-December, I think there's a fine time of 2 to 3 weeks where there are very little kids because they're back in school from Thanksgiving.
Right.
And then I think from February, March, I think February, March are that prime spots where the kids are going back to school. Not a lot of people are taking vacations.
Right.
So if you go there as adults, it's so much fun. A lot less lines. You get to enjoy the different rides without kids screaming all around you, waiting in line. Also, Disneyland, the app, did this I don't know
Genie
how long.
Plus, yeah.
Well, Genie Plus, but also the food thing.
Oh, yes. Being able to order ahead of time and being able to just pick it up when you get there at that specific time.
Yeah, it made it so much more worth it.
It was very much worth it.
All right, so favorite rides. Do you remember what your favorite rides were?
So my favorite rides were Star Wars. Oh my goodness, the name escapes me.
It escapes me too, but it's the one with the big one, right?
Yes,
the new one.
I think the newest one, the one that keeps breaking down and people wait hours.
Yeah.
If they don't have the Genie Plus app, they wait hours in the line.
Well, even with Genie Plus, you have to pay like an extra $20 per reservation to get there. So
totally.
But that one's really good.
Star Wars was one of them. There was also The Nightmare Before Christmas, and I think we shared that same favorite ride.
Which is the Haunted Mansion.
Right.
But around Christmas time, they change it to a Nightmare Before Christmas theme.
I can't remember what other rides were my favorite.
I feel like for the pure thrill of it, you really liked their Incredicoaster.
Oh, yes! But that's not... I mean... Are we talking about California Adventure too?
Oh, yeah. I'm putting it all in the bunch.
Definitely. So Incredicoaster is absolutely there. The Cars ride is absolutely there.
Oh, that one was good.
It's so fun.
But we ended up riding Incredicoaster 3 times.
3 times. We rode the Cars ride twice.
We rode the Guardians of the Galaxy ride.
Oh,
3 times.
That's another favorite. Guardians of the Galaxy. So I think that's to say that most of my favorite rides were in California Adventure rather than Disney. But Disney was great too.
Yeah. We also ruined some family's experience on Guardians of the Galaxy. I ruined it because I wanted to take a really good picture, and so we
threw our hands up in the air, and whoever was behind us, poor family, their children were small, so they couldn't be seen behind our hands.
But it gives them more of a reason to go back to Disneyland.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully they were able to go back in line and get another experience.
I'm sure it's fine.
Totally. Well, all this to say, I know that Disneyland is a corporation.
Yes.
I'm going to acknowledge that it's a corporation. We also know that theme parks are resource suckers.
Yes.
They do drain the economy, but...
As a person who lives on this earth who wants to gain experiences, I think it was something that was worth more than just the money and the time, but just the effort of going there and then just imbibing in what they have, because genuinely they create this world of almost utopia where every person that works there is so nice to you.
Right.
Everything is available. So yes, I agree. Disney as a major shell corporation, until they sponsor us, aren't the greatest. But I do think that in terms of picking up experience, it was really fun.
I think so too. I definitely, coming from an entertainment perspective, is definitely enjoyable. I'm not saying that I'm not going back. I definitely want to go back to Star Wars. Like, that particular experience was mind-blowing, and I don't use that word often, but I enjoyed myself.
Yeah. All right. Well, we may not be fully recommending Disneyland, but what can we recommend this week?
So our recommendation of the week is a small business. This is someone you should be following. This is someone you should be supporting. This business is called Collective Rest. It's founded and led by Cassandra Lam. I first found Collective Rest while Cassandra Lam was still with Join the Cosmos. And during the Georgia Spa shootings, Cassandra Lam created this Collective Rest experience where women and femmes of Asian diaspora were able to gather through Zoom with their mics off, with their cameras off, and we were able to just rest together, whether that was through yoga nidra, whether that was through breathing exercises or just movement exercises. There was no visual stimulation from other people. We were able to just nap together, whether that was napping lying down or if we were just sitting up and closing our eyes. This was a space where we were all able to just rest for 30 to 45 minutes together. On their website, collective-rest.com, Cassandra Lom describes the experience as trauma-informed guided rest practices to transport you from tired to tranquil. And there are 3 different ways that Cassandra offers these services. First, the Zoom calls each month that are donation-based. For those who are able to pay, they can donate to their Venmo, to Cassandra's Venmo. But for those who are not able to pay out of pocket, it's donation based, so it's totally free if you can't pay. The second is if you want to access recordings, there's a monthly donation via Patreon that you can subscribe to. And lastly, Cassandra also offers her services to workplace organizations. So if you want to bring collective rest to your company, you can reach out to Cassandra, and then from there, she will contact the contact person you share with her, and you can bring this experience to the rest of your coworkers.
Yep. And as an outsider who walks in as Jamae is finishing up her session, it looks very restful.
It's very restful.
Extremely restful. But once again, where can we find her?
We can find Cassandra at collective-rest.com. That's the Collective Rest website. And you can also find Cassandra on Instagram at collective_rest.
Awesome. And that's our recommendation for the week.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're getting into the start of our book, which is
Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. So to recap, last week we started reading chapters 1 through 7. So that was page 1 through 89.
Yeah. And so I felt like I was trying to figure out the characters during the first 7 chapters.
Totally.
One thing I asked Jamae to do was to help me create a chart of how these characters are related. I think we're learning a lot about them as we go. So not the whole story's told yet.
Right, definitely. And with Little Fires Everywhere, the interesting part of the book is that it doesn't only follow one character. There are multiple characters with multiple points of view, which is why we felt that it was necessary to create this character chart. And so the breakdown there are 2 primary families who are spotlighted. First are the Richardsons. The Richardsons is this core nuclear family of 6. We have the father named Bill, the mother named Delina, and the 4 children, Lexi, Trip, Moody, and Izzy. They are what you would call the white picket fence family. They seem very perfect from the outside for the most part. They definitely have their own troubles, but Elena and Bill have stable jobs. They own these properties, while the Warrens, the other family, are tenants to the Richardsons' rental property on Winslow Road. The Warrens are a family of 2, the mother, Mia, and the child, Pearl. They're not well-to-do like the Richardsons. They're the opposite. They are more travelers. They go from place to place, and once they get to a place, they don't have the most money. They shop at thrift stores. They don't have many belongings. And so we follow these 2 families, the Richardsons and the Warrens, and we see what becomes of this relationship from property owners and tenants.
Which I think for the Warrens, the interesting thing that kind of developed over the 7 chapters are they may not be financially well off, but it seems like they genuinely have a care for each other.
Right.
Something that they've built. And I mean, the story with Mia as these 7 chapters unfold is that she's not looking for financial gains. It seems like her artwork is really well done.
Definitely. And prosperous too.
Yeah, so if she wanted to churn out this work, she can, but she burns her photos after she's done with them. She doesn't do these things on a scale of trying to become a famous artist.
Right.
But it's much more from the source of the art.
Definitely. And in case y'all don't already know, spoilers ahead.
Oh yeah, we're talking about chapters 1 through 7.
Yes, we're gonna say all the things that we thought and all the details that came with it.
Yeah. All right. So what impressions did you get with Shaker Heights? Like, do you believe this is the best community. Do you believe that the best communities are planned?
So, my impression of Shaker Heights didn't really change from the first time I read this. Like I mentioned in the last episode, this is my reread of Little Fires Everywhere, and I'm rereading it as an ebook when the first time I read it was audiobook. And my impression of Shaker Heights was that it's a little small suburban area with families that have perfectly spaced yards and perfect appearances and the best schools, and it very much cookie cutter. That was the impression that I had in the past. And even coming into it this second time, that's the same impression I have. Answering the question, do I believe the best communities are planned? No, I do not think that the best communities are planned. I believe that the best communities are supported.
Shaker Heights kind of hit a personal note of the area that I grew up in.
Totally.
Which are, when they describe the planned communities in the story, some of the stuff that they said were the house can only be painted certain colors, the lawn care had to be maintained. The other funny thing is you had to drive to find the gas that's the cheapest.
Yes.
And these are all highlights of the area that I grew up in. We even had cul-de-sacs in these larger neighborhoods where you couldn't park along the street during certain hours of the night so that security can pass by. I don't know if it was security for us police, but they pass by and they drive past these large cul-de-sacs and they can look down the road and see if any cars are there, and that way they can spot if something bad is happening. Like that's how planned these communities are.
Interesting.
I think in the areas that are the most planned and seem the most calm, seemingly can be the most dangerous and the most chaotic. I actually was talking to my friend she is from Ohio, and I asked her if she knew about Shaker Heights, and she did confirm that it is what this story is telling us. So I thought it was really, that's an area that Celeste Ng was living in, right?
Familiar with, yes.
Yeah.
That's interesting. When I think about planned communities, it's a little different on Guam. Planned communities tend to be gated communities, so I didn't have access to those, although the village I lived in was very much suburban. I didn't have that same experience of having security watching over our street. I definitely had a different type of security, but that's why I think planned communities in itself are not always the best. Like, yes, they might be gated, but then I also hear of lots of parties going haywire in there, which is why I don't think that means that they're quote unquote the best.
Well, they're also gated, but also the question rises of why are they gated? Exactly.
What resonated the most in this first 7 chapters with you, Stephen?
So I thought these first chapters hit pretty hard. When we think about a lot of the recent news and history that have happened within the last 3 years with the different racial
tensions?
Yeah, with the different racial tensions that have kind of come up.
Yeah.
This book, I felt like hit a little bit extra hard. I saw a lot of the notes from this story of, especially with the rental unit, or when they talk about Miss Richardson's interest with the rental unit, of how they don't even need it. But what they do is they rent it out to people that are needing it. They even say that she sees it as a charity. Yep, she gives it to people she feels deserves it. So it's kind of this sense of, oh, so you feel like you're better than these people and you're handing it out to them. Which she doesn't need to own this property.
She doesn't.
But they get enough financial gain for, I forget what they called it, but they get financial gain for their little fun activities that they do with their family.
Definitely. So just vacation things.
Right. Whereas other people like me and Pearl and Mr. Yang, who's the Chinese tenant, all kind of need this because of the fact that that's where they are in their current life, their stage.
Right. Definitely. And in relation to that, the part of the story where Izzy blows up at her orchestra teacher, like the blatant racism of this teacher, like I do know that it exists. It happened to me as well growing up, but being reminded of that, how the teacher was like, "Do you not understand me? Do I need to say it in Ebonics?" And I was like,
Yes.
oh my gosh, I can't believe those words came out of this character's mouth. But also I've heard words like these come out of other teachers' mouths, and I'm like, wow.
Because it's not a microaggression at that point, right? Like, we like to use these new words that we have, like microaggression, but this is just aggression.
It's blatant racism.
Yeah, it's pretty sad, especially for this girl that they describe. I can't remember her name, but
her name is Deja.
Yeah, for her, who is described as very meek, very passive, and
but also very kind to her classmates.
Yeah, and she wasn't trying to do anything wrong. She was trying her best, and then for this teacher to blow back at her like that for no reason. Yeah,
that was that I remembered that scene so clearly from my last reading of it, and I didn't realize how soon it happened. I guess I knew these little details were there, and then when this big one came, I was just floored. And knowing that this still continues daily is very disheartening, and it brings me to what Mia asked Izzy, what are you going to do about it? And having that empowerment to know that you can do something about it was also in connection to that, what resonated with me, like, yeah, what are we going to do about this in real life?
Right, which is, that kind of leads me into one of the things I found the most interesting with the first 7 chapters are the relationships that are forming between different people.
Yes.
So Mia and Izzy, especially with Izzy starting to go into... Well, they had that big talk at the table where Izzy sat down. Mia made her the sandwich with the butter and the sugar.
Yes.
Which she makes for her own daughter.
Yeah.
Which I think has a lot of meaning and value to that.
Absolutely. That bridging and bonding that's happening. Yes.
And then Izzy then comes back towards the end of the 7 chapters and says... I need you to take me in. I'm going to be your assistant. This is something that I really want to do.
Yes.
So clearly, before we get, we'll get into predictions, but clearly this is something that's going to be a building relationship.
Absolutely.
Then we have Moody and Pearl.
Yes.
Which was about 3 chapters of the story, I feel.
Yes. Moody has this curiosity of the Warrens and ends up biking to the rental property, meets both Mia and Pearl, and ends up having this very, I'm gonna say, possessive friendship with Pearl.
Yes.
Like, I found her first, she's my friend, no one else can have her kind of relationship.
Which seems, it's that fine line of, it seems very innocent because she does want to be her... She genuinely wants to be her friend. He clearly likes her. Yeah. Even beyond a friend, it seems.
Yes.
But then that's the dangerous part, is he is now so possessive that anyone that wants to talk to her, he says, it's mine. Like, she's mine. I found her, just like you said.
Right.
She is a property for me. And I think... He is well-meaning,
right?
But that is the danger of that well-meaning.
Yes, exactly.
But that's also then what builds the relationship between Pearl and Trip and Lexi, which is some of the story of going to the party. She would have probably never gone to these things. She would not have gone shopping with Lexi if it wasn't for Moody bringing her there. Yes. So now it develops this whole story just from that relationship of Moody and Pearl.
Right. And it's really Moody who is the catalyst of all of this. He first visits Mia and Pearl.
Which he didn't do before, right? Like, one of the things that they said early in the book.
That none of the siblings have ever visited the property before.
Right.
Exactly. And so he visits Pearl and Mia, and then takes Pearl to his house, which again is where the relationships start building, where Lexi also kind of sees Pearl as like a doll in a way.
Yes, because they talk about
her up and doing her hair and showing her off to her friends, and I'm like, ooh, that's also problematic.
I think one of the interesting things with all the kids, all the Richardson kids, are that I don't think any of them are. They don't have bad intentions.
No.
But I think it's the fact that they're so protected within this
community.
Well, more than the community, but how they've grown up in this rich society.
Right.
They're very protected, so they don't see anything wrong with anything that they're doing.
Oh, yeah.
But clearly, from an outside perspective, there's a lot of issues with how they're treating the Warrens.
Right. I think with Trip, it's very interesting that it seems the most innocent, even though it's the most romantic.
Yeah. So is Trip in love with Pearl? Because he says, I'm in love with you.
He says, you know I love you.
You know I love you.
Yes,
right.
And it's one of those phrases that you say jokingly either as a teenager or as a young adult,
right.
trying to pass or trying to test feelings, I think.
Well, that, and he's the popular kid at school.
Right.
I'm sure this isn't the first time he said this to a girl.
Absolutely not.
That's why I don't even think that he loves her.
I don't think so. I think it's more of a flirtation.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Which is why I think it's so interesting that, at least for me, in my perspective, I usually think of romantic relationships as being less than wholesome. But for some reason, with Trip and Pearl, even though the tension is high and they seem to have eyes for each other, it seems very puppy love, not like oh my gosh, I'm falling in love, but more like, ooh, I think they're cute.
Right, and for Pearl, she states outright that she hasn't had the opportunity to have a relationship like this.
Right.
Let alone go and be able to sit down next to the person that she has a crush on.
True,
so
very
this
true.
is her first love, which we all know first love is a really powerful love.
Oh yeah, definitely. It stays in your mind for a long time.
Right. The other big relationship that we see is the one between Elena and Mia.
Which isn't really... I wouldn't... I guess you can call it a relationship.
By relationship, I mean they have now...
Interaction.
They're in each other's presence.
Yes, definitely. You can definitely see the differences in the way both women approach life, and how Elena comes to Mia as, I am this savior who is going to help you out of poverty. Especially in chapter 6 and chapter 7, when she offers Mia a job when Mia already has a job.
Yes.
And she already has earnings through her photography and through her art. And Mia, not wanting to rock the boat, just accepts. But it's also accepting not only for the money, but also to watch over Mia.
Watch over Pearl.
To watch over Pearl,
yeah.
Because she notices these changes with her daughter.
And I mean, it's the job that was offered, but at the same time, Mrs. Richardson offers to buy a painting, but she didn't really offer. She offered as in charity.
Right.
Like, you need my money.
Right.
Because you're clearly not doing well. Where the more we look at it from the perspective of Mia is she would do just fine.
Right.
But this is the life that she's chosen to live.
Exactly. And just because she doesn't have material wealth, or because she doesn't pursue material wealth, doesn't mean that she doesn't have inner emotional wealth or even relational wealth, just like we said about her relationship with her own daughter.
I'm curious what your feelings on Mia was, because we both watched the series. You've read this book already once through. This is my first time reading it through, but I'm curious what your perspective is on who you see Mia as a person.
I see Mia as a very observant yet sharp person. Not that she's trying to hide her intelligence, but she's
guarded.
She's guarded and only offering this information to those she sees are worthy of being part of that inner circle or that inner knowledge.
I was fascinated by how calm Mia seemed through this whole process. Even when Pearl brought home, I think it was Trip and Lexi.
Moody and Lexi.
Was it Moody and Lexi?
Moody and Lexi.
Mia stepped back and said, "This is what I wanted from Pearl. It was for her to create these relationships."
Right.
Not to go too much into outside of the book, but it's not the character that I had originally pictured from Mia. But then reading the story, that's what I kept thinking was Mia is such a calm and thoughtful.
I was going to say that Mia is very aware and situationally aware and also personally aware and a well-adjusted human being.
Right.
You see it when she talks to herself. She reminds herself that Pearl is a teen. This is what we wanted for Pearl. This is the town we chose to stay in. So she keeps reminding herself of these decisions rather than trying to justify her emotions.
Right. So, in line with that, how has the pacing been for you?
I think, just like we said with the hint, it's definitely a slow burn, but it's not boring either. Which is interesting because usually when a story is slow, I tend to lose interest really quickly. But I think what goes hand in hand with the pacing for me at least is the change of points of view. Like, even though it is written in third person, it does follow Moody, and then it follows Pearl, and then it follows Lexi, and then Elena Richardson, and then Mia. The changing points of view keeps me interested because I am trying to figure out what's going to happen next, and sometimes it allows me to zoom in and out of the present and looking into the future. So even though it's a slow burn, it's one that helps me also process, and I think it's very helpful since there are so many main characters. It helps me not only learn more about the character, but figure out what their motive is.
Right. Like who is the person behind the character.
Exactly. And it gives a well-roundedness for each person. Like it doesn't just say that Trip is this cool guy, Moody is this awkward kid, right. Lexi is this popular girl, and Izzy is this outcast. Yeah, even though those are the typecasts that they're put into, that's not all they are.
You're getting a more of a three-dimensional person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Which I did really like. I thought the first two chapters, which in description were the brightest imagery of the house being burnt down. I thought those were the slowest of all 7 chapters. And then as we started getting to characters, it seemed much more interesting of what their lifestyles were.
Right.
One thing I did notice was just trying to put a finger on the time period. They talked about how Bill, the father, Richardson, answers his cell phone, but no one else has one, so he's extending his antenna.
Yes.
So clearly we're talking about more 80s and 90s.
Yes.
Later they talk about a jukebox playing Sir Mix-a-Lot, Smashing Pumpkins, and Spice Girls. So 90s maybe?
Definitely. I think it's nicely centered in the 90s.
Yeah. Even though the pacing was a little bit slower, all these descriptions helped build this really beautiful picture of what I'm sure is just setting the scene for crap to happen.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You do see the sparks starting to fly. You do see embers starting to burn. And going back to the points of views and how there are different switches, I went into this rereading prepared to get confused because that's what I saw in many reviews, that those who read the physical book or the ebook got confused by the switches and points of view, especially when it was mid-chapter. However, I feel like because it's written in third person rather than in first person, it helped go from one character to narrator to the next character fairly seamlessly, especially when they were conversing with each other or relating or interacting with each other.
Yeah. I think one of the things that you had mentioned was that this does seem like a turning point, though. It seems like we're at chapter 7, we're starting to progress in the story a bit more.
Definitely. It feels like we're starting to go into a light jog. And the turning point feels even more like a turning point because all the main characters have finally been properly introduced. Because for the longest time, Izzy was this background character that was a troubled child. Izzy didn't show up very often. They didn't hang out with the other siblings. They didn't really show up at school. And if they showed up at school, it was to cause trouble. But now that Izzy has been introduced, has made this connection with Mia and has now said to Mia, I want to be your assistant. So essentially being a big part of Mia's life now.
Right. Now
it feels like, well, everyone is here. What's going to happen next?
Right. Not to mention, I think we almost skipped over one of the biggest parts of what I think was chapters 1 through 7, which is the locks and the toothpicks.
Yes,
hilarious.
The prank,
I felt bad, but man, that's so funny.
Yes.
But I also feel like any kids that might read this that are in high school, it may not be the greatest idea to give them ideas on how to destroy the school.
Also, I don't know many high schoolers who would want to read this book.
That's true.
Like, the pacing and the complexities, I think, not to say that high schoolers don't have the inner capability to process this book, but I think that especially in this pandemic and all the things that are coming at these young adults and these youth, I don't think a lot of them have the mental capacity to process this book at this time.
But that was so wild.
Yes. And how much detail there was in how the toothpick could be inserted, but
yes.
if it was jammed and splintered, then it would take longer to take out.
And then not to mention that Celeste, the writer, decided to go into full detail of the events that happened.
Yes.
And then follow the teacher that had wronged Izzy.
Yes.
All the way to the point of the bathroom.
Yes. The whole revenge.
Oh my gosh. I don't think that that's even going to come back later.
No.
I think it's just that was the detail that needed to happen so that it felt like Izzy got her full revenge.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. But speaking of which, what are your predictions? Well, I guess you kind of know what the story is going to be a bit.
For the most part, yes. I feel like as I was reading the first few chapters, the details and the foreshadowing helped me remember all the different things that were going to happen, but I don't remember everything in detail, so I can still try to predict different things.
So instead of predictions for you, maybe from what you remember reading, do you feel like this set it up well to lead us into the next several chapters?
I feel like the first few chapters set it up so well. There were so many Chekhov's gun, and for those of you who are in the literary community, Chekhov's gun is when a writer plants different objects or plants different ideas in smaller portions ahead of the book so that later on it circles back and you're like, oh my gosh, now I understand why that's there. So my foresight into the following chapters is that it's set up so well, we're in for a hell of a ride.
I think without really knowing what the book offers, I'm very interested in what these relationships build to, which I think is the next 4 chapters or so. I see these relationships building out into each coupling, let's say, starting to find their own space and then develop off of each other. I'm curious with the trouble that Izzy's going to continue to get into. I don't feel like this is the end of her,
absolutely
of
not.
Bad Izzy.
No.
Which I don't think it's Bad Izzy either. That's the wrong wording of Izzy kind of growing into this fire more.
Right, yes. And Izzy is not bad or evil or a villain in and of herself. She can only be seen as a villain in comparison to the perfection of her family.
Which is to say, the relationship between Trip and Pearl it's gonna start turning tumultuous. Between Pearl and Moody, it's gonna be even worse because Moody's gonna have this underlying jealousy. I don't think it's gonna happen soon, but at some point, I can only imagine that Pearl is gonna blow up at
Mia.
No, not well. I mean, that's gonna happen for sure. Mother-daughter relationship. I'm almost positive that's what's gonna happen. But I was thinking more that relationship between Pearl and Lexi. I can see her. I can see Pearl starting to maybe in the future rely on Lexi, and then that relationship to then blow up. I mean, Elena is just a very interesting character that we've only been superficially introduced to. So we'll kind of see what goes on there. But
absolutely,
our next pages that we're going to read,
we're going to be reading from chapters 8 through chapter 12, so all the way until the end of chapter 12 for the second section of Little Fires Everywhere. And for those who are following along on the ebook, that's pages 90 through 186.
So follow along. If you just like hearing us talk, then that's okay too.
Yes.
But if you have any comments, any questions, you can feel free to email us at
AsianBookClubPod, P-O-D, @gmail.com.
Our Instagram.
AsianBookClubPod, P-O-D.
In our bookshop.
If you want to purchase the book through our bookshop, or if you want to see more recommendations, you can find us at bookshop.org/shop/Asian Book Club Pod, P-O-D.
Yeah. We are eventually going to find a great outro instead of just yelling at you.
Thanks for joining us, y'all.
Yeah. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.